positioned this, my club, just won in the Dutch Cup, which means we're going to quarterfinals. Yay. Funny thing is, we were playing against my father's club. I'm going to make fun of him for a week now. So welcome everyone. Very nice to be here. I usually don't fly around for user groups, so it was quite fun when James invited me here. So first of all, let me introduce myself. I run my own company. It's a company with a Dutch name, Ingewikkeld, which means complex, which is how I like my projects. My current project is actually at the Amsterdam airport, Schiphol. Let me just really test this. Which was fun because I went into work this morning and then just, went to the airport to fly here. What I usually do is consulting or development stuff, things like that. And I've been either as a consultant or before I started my own company, just working full-time for companies. I've been, in positions like a team lead or lead developer, tech lead, stuff like that. And that's how I basically found out that it's quite important to keep on learning and to keep people in your team, keep them learning. Which eventually I was like, maybe I should do a talk about that, which is the talk I'm doing tonight. If you're on Twitter, feel free to mention me or follow me. But sometimes I try to not do too much tweets anymore these days, but sometimes I do. So that's about me, more than enough about me. Let's talk about you, because when I started preparing this talk for the first time, somewhere last year, the audience that I had in mind for this talk was the team leads, the managers, the CTOs, the people up in management of companies. But as it turns out, once I started doing this talk, there were a lot of developers in the room that also thought that what I was telling was actually quite useful. So I'm curious, how many of you here are responsible for a team in one way or another? It's not too many? So most of the other people are developers? Yes? Okay. So those of you that are responsible for a team, you should listen to me. Those of you who are developers, I'm going to give you some ammo to shoot at those people that are responsible for your team. So one of the main problems in PHP world, I don't know about this region, but at least in the Netherlands, one of the biggest problems in the PHP world is to try and find good developers. Given the amount of vacancies I saw on the screen when I entered here, I'm guessing it's about the same here. So when I was, I'm still responsible for hiring. When I was working for a company a couple of years ago, and I was responsible for hiring people there, of course, at first I was looking for people with the right skills, really senior developers. And as it turns out, it's really hard to find senior developers. And then I started thinking, okay, so how can we, find people that can work on these projects and are good enough and get them to senior level. I'm like, okay, so I'm not hiring anymore on just the skills. I'm hiring on a mindset. If people are ambitious, if they want to learn, I don't care if they have computer science background or not. I think the majority in the PHP world doesn't have computer science background. How many here have computer science background? Well, there you go. Most people in PHP world don't have computer science background. And the funny thing is, these people are no less developers than people with a computer science background. The funny thing is, I don't have a computer science background, yet apparently people pay me quite a lot of money to help them. So I decided, okay, I'm not going to look at their CV too much. I'm just going to talk to them and see what their mindset is. And try to hire people that just want to learn, that want to grow into that senior role. And then the next big problem in the PHP world is, when you've got those developers, that you make sure that they're still good in a year's time. There is there's several versions of a comic floating around on the internet, and basically, in that comic, there's two people. There's a manager and there's some kind of team lead or tech lead or something like that. And the manager says, what happens if we invest in our developers and they leave? Right? We've invested all this money and all this time, and then what does it give us? And then the team lead says, well, what if we don't and they stay? Because in our world, every day, if you don't learn anything, you're falling behind with the rest. There's so much new stuff coming out, and you have to keep on learning. It's impossible to stop learning and still do your job in a good way. At least that's how I feel about it. So, learning is important. It's very important. And I think we should teach ourselves not just to, learn every once in a while, but to keep on learning, to get into that habit of continuous learning. And in this talk, I will look at a couple of different ways of doing that. And also look at how we can motivate ourselves or our developers, if we're responsible for a team, to keep on learning. So let's first have a look at some of the ways of learning. Well, this one is obvious, right? You're all here, so that means you're already aware of the power of a user group, of how you can learn from a user group. We're sharing knowledge here, and now I'm on stage, and maybe next time you're on stage. And the fun thing is that next month, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a completely different subject, and the month after, it's going to be something completely else again. So every month, when you get here, you learn something new, and that's good. And the funny thing is that in a user group, you don't always learn just by sitting in a room. Maybe you learn even more when you get on stage to present. A lot of the talks that I do, whether it's at a user group or at a conference, it's about learning for myself as well, because while I'm preparing the talk, I'm researching the subject. And I learn a couple of things myself as well, even for topics that I've been, if I do a talk on Symfony, I've been working with Symfony since version 0.6.7. I still learn something new about Symfony, even though I'm working with it on a daily basis. So, the user group, it's interesting when you just sit down and listen, but it's even more interesting when you start speaking. I don't know about here, but I would recommend to look beyond this user group. Maybe there's some polyglot user groups here as well, which is interesting because then you get a completely different viewpoint from a different language. And every language has the same problems to solve, but they solve it in a different way sometimes. And it can be good to do that, to hear about it. So I hear there's a conference here as well. How many of you have actually been to PHP South Coast? Not everyone. So here's your assignment for this year, or for next year. Get to the conference as well. A conference is a bit more formal than a user group, usually. It's bigger, there's more talks, there's a lot of different sessions to choose from, but it's all sort of the same format in terms of talks, where you sit down and you listen, which is fun, and it can really be inspiring. But there's so much more that you can get from a conference. A couple of years ago, well, that's actually quite a few years ago, I'm getting old. This must have been 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. I was looking for a job, and I went to Dutch PHP conference, and I met someone there, where 3 months later I was working at the company where he was working as well. And now he works for me. That's the fun part. So maybe the talks are interesting in terms of a conference, but the most important part of the conference is that hallway track. Hang out in the hallway every once in a while. Talk to people you don't know yet, and maybe you find your next job at the next PHP South Coast. Make sure to not just visit PHP South Coast. Head up to London for PHP UK, head up to Manchester for PHP Northwest, because you'll meet different people. And the more people you have in your network, the better it is. Because you might not have use for those people immediately, but maybe in half a year, you're stuck on a problem, and you remember talking to someone at PHP South Coast who was working with the same technology and who might have the answer for you. You shoot off an email, and they might just help you and solve your problem. Which is, I'm not the best developer in the world, but if I'm stuck somewhere, I just go on Slack or IRC or Twitter or whatever, and I have the solution. Which is, I hope people pay me for that as well. And just as the user groups, make sure to not just, stick with PHP conferences. There's a couple of really good conferences like DOMcode in the Netherlands, which is a conference that handles just about every language, and maybe even beyond language. It goes into hardware as well. I saw a really interesting talk about how kids program with Scratch, which is like a programming language for kids. And they analyzed how kids learned from the start to do clean coding. Whereas we usually make a mess of our code, and then if we're lucky and we have PHP Code Sniffer and Mess Detector installed, we'll clean it up a bit. Apparently kids, instinctively do clean coding, and somewhere along the way we get really spoiled and we don't do it anymore. There's also some other interesting conferences like Git Merge is an interesting conference, stuff like that. And just like the user groups, don't go just to your nearest conference. Go to one, somewhere else. Meet people. So training sessions, this is the most, when you talk about learning, people always think about training sessions. Which makes sense, right? You pay an X amount of money, you sit in a room for 2 days, and now you've learned something. That works for some people. It doesn't really work for me. I need to get more hands-on. I need to sit down and actually do stuff before I actually learn. And most of the traditional classroom training sessions, you have one teacher in front of the room, and a lot of people sitting on a chair, and that's it. So, when you consider booking some training session, find a local freelancer or someone that's offering training that goes beyond just a classroom training, a teacher talking about stuff. Because it can be really useful to get some hands-on experience with some actual technology. We've got a couple of people in the Netherlands doing stuff like that, which is really nice. I keep on clicking. I spoiled it. And then there's more unconventional events. There we go. I spoiled the surprise a bit. So I organize WeCamp, which is a camp, like a 5-day camp on a private island in the Netherlands. And the whole idea behind WeCamp is that we get you out of your comfort zone. You're going to sleep in tents, and you're going to work with people you're not used to working with, and you're going to do stuff that you normally don't do. And after 5 days, so this is actual feedback. I'm not going to brag here because I organize it. This is actual feedback. People leave the island completely transformed. That's what they say, not me. I'm pretty sure there's more stuff like weekend out there. But the most important thing that I mean with unconventional events is that they get you out of your comfort zone, because that's important. Do an event that has nothing to do with PHP. Do an event where, if you sit in an office all day, go to an event where you're out in the wild, on an island, like weekend. And do stuff that you normally don't do, as long as you behave. Now, something that you can actually use in your day job. This is useless. Oh, this is useless as well. There we go. Is the concept of small controlled experiments. There is a situation where in your work you run into a problem, you don't know the immediate solution to it. And what usually happens in a medium to large team is that we get all the developers in a room and we sit there for at least an hour, and then during that hour we discuss all the possible solutions, and at the end of the hour we decide what the actual solution is going to be. Well, that's in a team that's 5 people, that's 5 man-hours that you've just wasted and you don't have anything yet. You only have like an idea of how to solve it. So why not, instead of calling a big meeting, start an experiment? Maybe 2 people, you put them down behind the same computer, and you're just going to try one of the solutions. You're going to time box it into an hour, and you're going to just see if the solution that you have in mind actually works. The fun part is, even if you fail, you've learned a lot about your code, working together, stuff like that. And if you don't fail, but you succeeded, then you have a great solution, and you've only spent like 2 man-hours instead of 5, and you already have the solution. One important thing with small controlled experiments is that failure is good, because you learn from it. So start doing a bit more of experimenting, proof of concepts, stuff like that. There's a great blog post. I'm going to post these slides online, so you don't have to actually write it down. There's a great blog post by Matthias Verraas about this as well, which I recommend you read if you're interested in small controlled experiments. Then, similarly to that, is code kata, except for the fact that now you don't take a problem that you've encountered at work, but you can choose from one of hundreds of small assignments that are posted online. There's several websites that have these small problems you need to solve. One is codekata.com. The idea is the same though as with small controlled experiment, and that is, you take a small problem and you start solving that problem. You start experimenting, playing with code, trying to find the right solution to the problem, and see what works and see what doesn't work. And again, you learn by actually doing something, and you learn just as much from not solving the problem as you do from solving the problem. I mentioned this before a bit in the small controlled experiments, but pair programming is actually a great way of learning. Usually people see pair programming mostly as a way of getting a higher quality of code. But actually, when you sit down with 2 people and 1 computer and you start programming, there's 2 people that are actually learning. The person that's coding is learning from the input that they get from the other person. And the person that is watching is learning a lot from the way that the person typing is actually trying to solve the problem. So you've got 2 people that actually learn by pairing, sitting down together and start developing stuff. And the added benefit is that your code is usually a lot better. And actually, when I did the talk this talk last year, there was a professional tester in the room, and he told me there's like 20 to 50% less defects when you do pair programming as opposed to regular programming, even when you do code reviewing as well. And that's another one. Code reviewing is usually regarded as a way of getting a higher quality of code, because two people see more than one person. But this is, well, similar to the pair programming. There's two people learning when you do code reviews. There's one person that's getting comments on their code, on how to improve their code, and they're learning about how to improve their code. And the other party, the person reviewing, is actually learning from reading another person's solution and seeing how they solve that problem. One very important thing when you do code reviewing, or actually when your code is being reviewed, is that you need to keep in mind that comments placed on your code are not personal. I've seen stuff escalate after a code review where two developers really didn't like each other anymore. It's not a personal thing, it's about the code, it's about the solution, it's about improving that code. So don't take it personal. And the next time you're the person reviewing. Well, this is obvious, right? Reading books. The funny thing is you can learn a lot from reading non-tech books as well. There's a lot of very inspiring biographies, for instance, about people from the tech world, which can be really interesting, and you can learn a lot from it as well. And sometimes there's even books that have nothing to do with technology, and while you're reading it, you're just thinking, this could actually be applied to programming as well. So definitely keep reading books if you're reading books, and start reading books if you don't. But this is a less obvious one for a lot of people, and that's documentation. There's a lot of different ways of learning from documentation. Obviously, there's reading the manual. Can I swear? No, I won't. Reading the F manual. And by actually reading documentation, you'll find features you didn't even know existed yet. You can understand how stuff works. And that can be really useful. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I've never ever been in the situation where I was like, ooh, a new library, let's start reading the documentation. So usually for me, it's like a reference. I run into a problem, I look at the documentation, hopefully find the solution to the problem. And if I don't, well, I can write the manual, or at least the part that I'm missing, right? The fun thing about writing parts of the documentation is that you need to know how the software works before you can write the documentation, which means you learn about how the software works. I don't think I actually have a slide about this, but it's really, really fun every once in a while, if you're working with a framework or a CMS or stuff like that, to not just write your own code, but to dig into the code of the tool that you're working with. Find out how it works. It's really useful. And then while you're at it, you'll find something that's not documented yet, and you can write the documentation. So you learn stuff with your software. But another funny thing about writing documentation is that you're going to be looking at the software in a completely different way. Because now instead of using it to write your software, you'll have to explain it to someone else. And this is also how rubber ducking works, right? You run into a problem, you explain it to someone else, and then find the solution yourself, because you're thinking about it differently. You're thinking about how do I explain this problem to someone else? And while you're doing that, you find the solution yourself, which is why you shouldn't do that with a teammate. You should find a rubber duck or a PHP elephant, explain to them the problem, find the solution yourself, and then bug someone else if you don't find the solution. Anyway, thinking about how to explain something to someone else in terms of documentation will, help you learn about how it works. And while we're at it, I stalled it again. While we're at it, if there's already documentation, so there's one thing worse than no documentation, that's incorrect documentation. So if you find a problem in the documentation of whatever tool you're using, make sure to fix it. Most of the open source projects are on GitHub, so it's very easy to send them a pull request and update the documentation. And a lot of people that come after you will be really happy that the documentation is actually correct. And then, again, there's one thing worse than no documentation, and that is documentation that's incorrect. So if you don't have the time to fix it, at least remove that part of the documentation so not 20 other people will fall into the same trap. Obviously, you don't want to remove all of the documentation, just the part that's incorrect. And then once you're in the habit of writing stuff, explaining stuff, don't stop at the documentation. Start your own blog if you don't have one yet. Write articles there. Or if you want to go even beyond your own blog, publish articles in magazines. I know that, for instance, PHP Architect is always looking for people that want to write articles for their magazine. And the fun thing there is, you even get paid for it. So that's about documentation. Another great way of learning is to find a mentor. And I think a lot of people, at least out in the PHP community, started out with the help of someone who mentored them, helped them get better. I know along the years I've had several people that I consider a mentor, even if it wasn't officially a mentor-mentee relationship. A lot of people have helped me grow, and you can do that within your own team as well. Assign people to each other, help them grow. It doesn't even really have to be, we've got a senior developer here and he's going to mentor this junior developer there. It could be two meteors that just help each other. Because they will have different experiences, different skill sets, and they can help each other fix that, get better, stuff like that. And if you're, sometimes it can be awkward, because mentoring is not just about coding skills, it's also about social skills, stuff like that. Sometimes it can be awkward to talk to one of your colleagues about a problem that you're having. Maybe it's not a tech problem, maybe it's a problem with a manager or with a colleague, stuff like that. So you can also get people, like external developers, external people to come in as a mentor. There's one customer where I go in every month for a couple of hours just to talk to all the developers. See what problems they're running into, just help them along. And I don't really do anything more than listen, maybe give them some advice. And it can be really useful, and it's not that expensive to get someone in for just a couple of hours. If you're familiar with open source and PHP, you will probably know that there's also a project for this. If there's a problem in PHP, we're going to solve it within PHP. So there's PHP Mentoring, which is basically a website where either you can register as a mentor or register as a mentee, find someone either in your neighborhood or on the other side of the world, and keep in touch with them. And the fun thing is, you'll learn just as much being a mentor, because you'll learn a lot from the problems that other people run into and how they, try to process that, how they try to get beyond that problem, and by communicating with them. So definitely, if you're interested in either being a mentor or a mentee, go to phpmentoring.org. And then don't forget that work isn't all about work. It's very important to keep the social part going as well. Keep people talking to each other and have fun with each other. So go do some crazy stuff as well every once in a while with the team. Favorite of mine is laser gaming, because people are really tired afterwards and they get to shoot each other, which is fun. At least I think so. But you know, go do something fun, not just work-related stuff. It's good to see people in another context every once in a while. And I'm pretty sure that there's a lot more ways of learning. But I'll move on to the next part, which is motivation. I've seen a lot of different teams, a lot of different companies, and sometimes I've seen developers that, you know, they were ambitious from the start, they wanted to learn, they kept on learning, and they tried finding new ways of learning. And then there were the developers that were, I don't know, holding back a bit. They didn't really get the motivation to keep on learning. So let's have a look at what we need to do, or hopefully, to get people motivated. First of all, which, you know, I'm coming back to what I started with, people need to want to learn. When you're hiring a developer, you need to find the people that are ambitious, that have that mindset of, you know, I want to learn, I want to go beyond where I am right now. And I'll go as far as saying that having that mindset of, you know, wanting to learn, being ambitious, is way more important than having X years of experience with whatever. I've had so many people come in saying, yeah, I have 7 years of experience with PHP, and as it turned out, they've been doing 7 years of solving the same small problems. You know, it's not, experience isn't everything, it's also about the different problems that you run into and how you try to solve it, stuff like that. Especially in our field of work, because, you know, there's so many different problems that we can solve. So that's step one. And then step two, as a manager, you need to show them that you want them to learn. I've literally been in companies where at 5 o'clock, the boss was standing next to my desk saying, you need to go home. It's 5 o'clock. Why are you still here? Yeah, I wasn't there for very long. As an employer, as a manager, you need to show your team, you know, I want you to learn, I want you to evolve. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. So let's have a look at some. First of all, create a personal development plan. Sit down with the developer and make a document. And this is, so I'm talking here to managers, but if you're a developer and not a manager, you can sit down and make your own plan as well. It doesn't have to be something between a manager and a developer. You can make your own goals, you can set your own goals, that's okay. It doesn't have to be like a big, formal 20-page document listing all kinds of checklists and stuff like that. And definitely what you don't want to do is, you know, attach the amount of raise someone gets on their salary to how many goals they reach. That's not a way of really motivating someone. That's forcing them into something, and that's not fun. And we need to keep it, you know, fun. So the personal development plan shouldn't or doesn't have to be like a really formal big document. It can be just a single page. Just a single page listing, okay, so during our conversation, we found out that you're here right now, in this position, this skill set, and in, for instance, 1 year, I want to be there. I want to know this. How are we going to get there? Oh, we can book some training sessions, or you could go to some user groups or a conference. You could, you know, take some of your work time to learn something. We could find a project that fits this ambition, stuff like that. And then the personal development plan is never ready. It's always a work in progress. So make sure that along the way you have like a couple of milestones where you evaluate the past period. Because maybe when you set a goal for 1 year out, after 3 months you come to the conclusion that this really isn't what you want. For instance, if you're a developer and you want to get more into project management, and after 3 months you decide, well, project management really isn't my thing, which is a possibility. I know I really like, no, I don't like project management. Anyway, it's useless to say after 3 months, oh, you don't like project management, but we've set this goal for a year out, so you need to get there. No, after 3 months, you can just, change the goal to something else and find a new way of getting there. And then when you've got a plan, obviously you need to invest money. And this is where it gets scary for the managers. Oh, wait, I need to spend money for this? Yes. Think of training sessions, conferences, even user groups can cost some people money. Although these days, on my way here, I was talking, where are you? Can't see you right now. Anyway, there's a couple of different user groups here, but sometimes it can be hard for some people, depending on their personal situation, to actually pay for the gas to get to a user group, right? So offer your developers a budget, or allow them to just ask. Because sometimes it's even the, £10 or £20 that they need to get to a user group can be really hard depending on the personal situation. And as a employer, I don't mind spending £20 or, well, €20 in my case. There's my Brexit joke. €20 in my case, which is about the same as £20 right now. I was thinking of a Brexit joke, I couldn't find one. There it is. I don't mind, spending €20 for someone to get to a user group. Because they'll learn something there, they'll meet people there, and eventually, 90%, maybe 95% of the projects that I do come from the community, come from the people that I, or people that work for me, meet at user groups or conferences. Because they'll remember, there was this guy, and he does some consulting stuff. And they'll send us an email, and we'll sell them some training, or some consultancy. So, it's for me, it's a very small investment, and it can, earn me a lot of money. And more importantly, you need to keep that conversation going. Don't tell them, this is your budget, whatever. Talk to them, what do you want to do? You want to go to a conference? Maybe you want to go to weekend. I really recommend you to go to weekend. Yes, I do. So, stuff like that. 2 years ago at weekend, we had one of the people that came in as an attendee. He brought an Arduino. An Arduino is what, 20, 25 euros, something like that? It can give you a lot of fun hacking around with it. And, hacking around with an Arduino, you'll learn a lot. So, I can spend €1,000 on a training session or 25 on an Arduino. That makes sense, right? And they, actually at weekend, they did the project with the Arduino, and they made it so that they wrote a Slack bot where you would give the Slack bot the notes to play, and the Arduino would actually play the music. So, it's a completely unrelated, hopefully, probably unrelated project to what you do in your day job. But you'll learn a lot from writing the Slack bot, writing the communication to the Arduino, stuff like that. Playing around. And then the less obvious one is that you also need to invest time. So, from what I heard, developers are just like humans. And sometimes they actually do have a life outside of work, which basically means you cannot expect from developers to do all of the learning outside of work hours. What I do with my company is I do the famous 80-20 rule that Google used to do, and they don't do it anymore, but I still do. And it's a lot of fun because every Friday we don't work for our customers. Every Friday we work on our own projects. We organize weekend, we work on open source projects, we work on internal projects, stuff like that. Which means we get pulled out of our daily routine and we do other stuff. And we learn a lot from that. From organizing weekend, I actually learned to do some project management. I don't do it anymore though, I have my people for that. But I learned a lot from organizing that about project management, but also about stuff that I don't use in my day job. Like, if you do electrical stuff on an island and it starts raining, you need to make sure that it's protected against the rain. Things like that, essential skills. And as a company, you can benefit from that as well. There's a lot of people that know about my company only because we organize weekend, or because we sponsor our local user group, or because Mike, who works for me, is the lead developer for PHP Documenter, so my company logo is on the PHP Documenter website. Stuff like that. And the fun thing is, again, I'm going to repeat myself, failure is still an option. We've started some projects along the past years that we never even completed because we found out it's going to take A, way too much time, or B, we're going to have to invest a lot of money and we're not going to do that. But still, we learned a lot even from the project that failed because we played around with a lot of different APIs, we played around with virtualization, a lot of different things that we now use in our day jobs as well. So the most important lesson that I want to give to those here that are responsible for a team is that you need to enable your developers. It's our responsibility as managers to not just help them do their jobs, but help them do their jobs well and help them get better. And I really like the word enabling, which is a term that Raphael Doms came up with for Amsterdam PHP, where he said, we are not organizers, we are not crew, we're just enablers. We enable the community to learn. Which I think it's a good team lead, a good manager, a good CTO, a good business owner should enable their crew to do a good job. And then, yes, people will leave. At some point, people will leave for different reasons. Some people want less travel. Some people want a different challenge. Some people want more money. That's an option. And if you don't give it to them, yes, they're going to leave. And actually, that's good. That's okay. It's good for people to sometimes, have a change of scenery, learn something else. And then, in the end, the thing you really don't want to worry about is this conversation. Because you really don't want, people to stay but don't learn anything. Because every time they don't learn anything and someone else does, you're falling behind. So don't be scared of people leaving. Be afraid that they don't learn and they stick around. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes. Do we need a microphone for this?
No.
No? Okay. Shout.
You mentioned small experiments.
Yes.
Putting two people in a room and coming up with a solution.
Yeah.
How do you solve the problem where they come out of the office and go, found a solution to this, and the manager goes, great, put it on production.
Yes, okay.
Prototype code makes its way, rather than being rewritten, makes its way into production.
Yeah. So the trick with prototypes is that you should never put them into production. The problem is that they usually go into production. You don't really solve that problem unless you teach your manager how code works. It's very hard to prevent that from happening if a manager doesn't understand how it works. So yes, this is part of the learning experience of the manager. And again, failure is an option there. Put it into production, make it feel really hard, and they'll learn next time not to do that anymore. Or just warn them. That's actually probably the better solution. More questions? No more questions? There's going to be beer afterwards, isn't it? Okay, well, thank you very much. This is my blog, and if you join me in, feel free to leave me some feedback.